Good morning. Don't know what that frame looks like, but let's give that a crack. So this morning I'm just going to show my editing process in LumaFusion. I'm editing a podcast. Oh, are these headphones still plugged in? Is that going to make a difference? Anyway, it's all going to change in a second when I change the headphones to this. Three, two, one, start. Start the sync. So this is a little interview with Peter Zeihan that was on the radio in New Zealand. And I've cut it together, done a rough cut. Let's have a look.
We've had a weird road. It used to be that everything that was imperial. And you had a British system, a French system, a Japanese system, and those systems fought over colonies or access and trade lanes. That brought us World War II. But at the end of the war, the Americans drew their allies together and said...
Okay, so I've already added some music. The way to do that is to get it from YouTube, the back end of YouTube Studio, and then you put it onto your iPad. And then I'm using, is it Kevin MacLeod? Yeah. There's this guy called Kevin MacLeod. I like all his music, so I just downloaded all of his songs. And they're quite varied. So sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. But let me show you a cool thing that you can do to make shots look better. So see this shot of the silhouetted man.
And you had a British system, a French system.
You can add a slow zoom. So you just double click. Go to the start of the clip by pressing the back button. Then you press the frames plus, so that'll mark the beginning. And then you go to the end and just do a little zoom and maybe go up. So it's going to go. Sometimes I do it too fast and it looks a bit tacky. So, well, you can't even notice this. Maybe it's a bit slow, but you get the idea.
And you had a British system, a French system, a Japanese system, and those systems fought over colonies or access and trade lanes. That brought us World War II. But at the end of the war, the Americans drew their allies together and said, we're going to try something a bit different. Instead of everyone having to fight...
I'm going to take that breath out. So he goes... I'm trying to make the videos like really punchy. So... like a TikTok video. Boom, boom, boom. No one wants to hear you breathing. They just want the information.
Bit different. Instead of everyone having to fight for everything, we're going to use our Navy to patrol the global oceans so that anyone can go anywhere at any time and interface with any partner and access any raw material or market or supply chain.
I wonder if I can fix up that little stutter, because he says raw material wrong. He goes raw, raw, raw. Let's have a look.
Access any raw material.
Yeah, it's that little raw. And the beautiful thing is you just click on either side of the raw, and then it should sound better.
Raw material or market.
It still sounds a bit funny, but it's not as bad.
Access any raw material or market or supply chain. There's just one catch. You must be on our side. We bribed up an alliance to fight the Cold War, and we know this as globalization. This is what brought us global finance and manufacturing and energy and the rest. And that has changed the way we live.
I'm going to get rid of that R. And that is... and the breath before it. So that'll make it a bit punchier. If the sound is like too abrupt, add a transition. So it'll dissolve in. Let's hear that.
And that has changed the...
Perfect. That's why it helps having the music in the back, so that it covers up bits.
Energy and rest. And that has changed the way we live. Because when people got the opportunity to industrialize and globalize, we urbanized. We moved off the farm to take those manufacturing...
We know, he says this all the time.
And when you live on a farm, kids are free labor, so you have a whole bunch of them. You play that forward 70 years, and it's not that we're running out of children. That happened 40 years ago.
You know what I'm going to do? So in story blocks, you can type in the word time lapse and it shows all the time lapse videos. And there's some really cool ones that are like clocks. So to represent time there, when he says fast forward 70 years, I'm gonna like visually show that.
Labor, so you have a whole bunch of them. You play that forward 70 years.
Yeah, there. What I'm gonna do after I've done this cut in LumaFusion is I'm gonna import it into CapCut and add special effects and titles. And then this one's done. Because I've already added all the storybook images. I'm just getting a bit fancy now. See that clock? Might as well just use that one. The trick is, you know, you could spend like days and do like the most amazing video ever, but you got to get it out there. So I sort of like try to balance between being fast and being good. And at the moment, because my channel's not monetized, I'm actually not being as fast as I would be normally. I'd just crank them out, but I'm taking a little bit more time. So it's been good to learn more stuff. Let's have a look at that.
So you have a whole bunch of them. You play that forward 70 years. And
It's not in the right spot.
you play that forward 7.
I also add a little vignette onto all the images. I've already done it to all of them. And I don't know what that setting does, but I like it. And then a little vignette, you know.
You play that forward 70 years. And it's not that we're running out of children. That happened 40 years ago. We're now running out of adults. And it is impossible to run a modern economy without a consumption base and a worker base. And we've always known we were going to hit this point in this decade. And now here we are. Well, we were always going to hit a break point this decade, but...
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut out and here we are. And I'll show you something cool. Press the plus button. Add blank. Oh, what did I do? Oh, I did it. Yeah. No, added text wrong. Add blank clip. And it just makes a little gap there. And then what I'm going to do is have some music. So there's a little pause in his speech.
And we've always known we were going to hit this point in this decade. Well, we were always going to hit a break point this decade.
It feels like he says the same thing again.
To hit this point in this decade. Well, we were always going to hit a break point this decade, but certain things have been able to speed up the process a little bit. COVID.
Let's just get rid of that because he already sort of said it.
Certain things have been able to speed up the process a little bit. COVID is absolutely near the top of that list because all of a sudden everyone saw a health reason to reshore a lot of the supply chain. So we got a kind of a jump start on reshoring and breaking up the globalized system of supply that we've become used to. The leadership of the United States, the willingness.
Let's add a little pause in there too. Blank clip. And a little transition.
Used to. The leadership of the United States, the willingness of the American political system to kind of hold up the civilizational ceiling and keep the world safe for transport, that's gone.
Get rid of that breath. That's gone.
That's gone. And as we're seeing with the Ukraine war, as countries try to take advantage of this for their own reasons, it leads to more and more disruption. countries are trying to carve out little bits of this for themselves. The problem that they're going to discover is that a lot of the countries that Americans think of as problematic, Russia, China, Iran, they're actually more dependent.
So this is kind of good news, isn't it? That these countries that misbehave are actually very dependent on the global system.
Iran, they're actually more dependent upon globalization than most of the countries we like. They're dependent upon access to foreign markets to sell their wares or their energy or to purchase products that they can't make themselves. So
Let's get rid of that breath and that R.
That they can't make. That they can't. That they can't.
What did I do there? Undo. I just want to transition. Oh, why is it doing it like that? So if that happens, it's because those two arrows are pressed. I just want one. Is it? How do I do it? Let's try. I don't know why. I think that's better, isn't it? I don't know. Let's listen.
That they can't make themselves.
Works. I don't know what's going on.
Purchase products that they can't make themselves. So it's not that I'm
Get
going
rid
to.
of the so.
It's not that I'm going to rah America here, but the United States never globalized because globalization.
By taking out those little so's, you're saving a lot of time for people. So if you cut out a minute and then 1,000 people watch it, you've saved 1,000 minutes. And it's only taken you 1,000 minutes.
The United States never globalized because globalization was a bribe. If we had globalized, we would have just been another empire, and very few countries would have had reason to make common cause with them.
See, because I spend so much time fixing the audio, it's really annoying when other channels, you know who you are, steal my audio.
Had reason to make common cause with us. And so we allowed our manufacturing base to be somewhat hollowed out, which means that when globalization goes away, we don't suffer nearly as many as most of the countries out there. Before globalization...
Let's add a little dramatic pause there because it's an interesting statement. Playing clips, sometimes they're a little bit long, so just make it a bit shorter. Add a transition.
Out there. Before globalization, you could only have something if you could make it within your own network. So if you didn't have oil, you didn't have...
Get rid of that so.
If you didn't have oil, you didn't have transport. If you didn't have fertilizer, your food production was incredibly low and you had a very light population. If you didn't have...
Get rid of the R in the breath. Clip, clip, snip, snip. Add transition. I don't know why it keeps doing that cross dissolve. Listen.
If you didn't
The
have...
R's still in there. Let's go back. Why is it doing that? That's it. So you just want it to just dissolve on that side, that clip, not both.
If you didn't have iron ore, you weren't going to have steel, so you weren't going to have railways. Globalization allowed everyone to take what they had or what they could be good at and trade that for something else. Trade that for something else, and that created global trade in the form that we now recognize. There's two paths here. One is to use state policies to lower the cost for being young parents. I'd say Sweden has been partially successful. The downside is
That's the R, and that's the breath. Get rid of both of them.
successful. The downside is that the policy is in Sweden, for your first kid, you get 9 months. In Sweden, for your first.
That's the stutter and a little breath. This is 14 minutes. You can see there just underneath the thing. We're 3.5 minutes in.
Sweden, for your first kid, you get 9 months maternity leave. For your second kid, you get, I believe it's 15 now, and it goes up with each kid. Well, what they discovered with that policy is if you were a woman and you were under 30, no one would ever hire you, because you could show up for your first day of week of work, get hired, say that you're pregnant, and they wouldn't see you for 6 years, and you had to pay them. So we got this weird. And you had to pay them. So we got this weird sex dynamic in the workforce.
Just get rid of the breath and the R.
So we got this weird sex dynamic in the workforce that was not healthy at all. The other way to do it is just to have a system that naturally keeps the cost of living low. So cheap land, cheap electricity, cheap housing, cheap finance, cheap food. There are very few countries that have been able to do that at scale. The two at the very top of the list are the United States and New Zealand. But if you look historically, going back the last 60 years, the cost of living per person in New Zealand is among the lowest in the advanced world, right there with the United States. Now, will this evolve in time?
Get rid of the now and the breath.
State. Will this evolve in time? Of course. We're changing the rules of the game. Of course things are going to be different. But that has meant that New Zealand and the United States have had the highest birth rates in the advanced world for 50 straight
there's no vision there.
Consider American-led capitalism or European democratic socialism.
Let's move that.
United States have had the highest birth rates in the advanced world for 50 straight years. Consider American-led capitalism or European democratic socialism or fascism. These are all different methods for managing economic systems, for regulating supply and demand, labor and investment. But every single one of them is predicated on something that has been true since the dawn of recorded history. Populations get bigger. Not at the same rate, not the same every year, but the pie always increases. So it's about divvying up a larger and larger resource. That's not the world we're in anymore. The advanced world's population has already peaked. In the case of Germany and Japan, it's been declining for quite some time. And for most of the rest of the advanced world, it will pass the peak this decade. The pie's not getting bigger anymore. So we need a different economic model.
I don't know about this music.
And
it's a bit... Well, definitely doesn't match the images. Let's make it a bit softer. It's already minus 26. This is how you make the music softer, by the way. Press the audio and then you take the gain down. But what if I put some images of people, of things moving a little faster? rather than that slow shot. I can still use the slow shot, but what you can do is speed it up. Double click, press the little clock button, speed it up to like 3x. Just so you know, when you used to do that in Final Cut Pro, like back in the day, that would take about 10 minutes to render. Now it's instant. Amazing. Play.
Time. And for most of the rest of the advanced world, it will pass the peak this decade. The pie's not getting bigger anymore.
So I have this really cool idea to add some animations to it, which you can do with CapCut, but they're very hard to find and you don't always find what you're looking for. But now there's this AI studio, this AI animation called Dream Studio that's just blowing my mind. But I'll do a separate video on that.
The pie's not getting bigger anymore. So we need a different economic model. We need a different economic model. And if you look at our history, look at the last 10 major wars, including the world wars, but not limited to that. At their core, it's about geography, it's about resource access, and it's about economic theory and how you apply it. All of a sudden, that last part that we've struggled over for centuries, we have to figure out again, and we are not.
I feel like the music is still distracting. I'm going to take it all the way down to like 40. It's like barely there. And let's transition that out. See what that sounds like.
Again. And we are not going to get it right on the first try. And we're certainly not going to get it right this decade. The Han ethnicity has been the dominant population block of the territory we recognize as China today for 3,500 years, but they've only actually been in charge of China for about 75 of those years, most of which is under the American-led globalized order. So the idea that China is even remotely capable of playing the long game is historically just kind of funny. More important factor is that we're going to see the end of the Chinese system this decade. And I don't mean the end of the Communist Party, I mean the end of central governance in China. The issue is that the Chinese
take the breath out, but we'll add a pause because it's a dramatic statement, you know.
The issue is that the Chinese came late to globalization. They didn't really start the process of industrialization broad scale until the late 1980s, early 1990s. And when you start the process late,
cut the word out.
And when you start the process later, you're able to learn from the people who came before. So it took the Brits 7 generations to industrialize. It only took the Germans 4. It only took the Koreans 3. It only took the Chinese 1. And that sounds great, and it did generate some of the fastest.
Generates.
And it did generate some. Generate some of the fastest economic growth in human history. However, it means they compressed the entire process into 4 decades. Now, that sounds great.
The cool thing about having the music underneath is then it won't be so easy for people to steal my audio. But people in the comments will go, I don't like the music. I don't like the music.
That sounds great, and they went from pre-industrial poverty to kind of this, I don't want to call it post-consumer, but definitely a highly advanced system very, very quickly. But that means they also...
Okay, I just want to get to the end now, 7 minutes in.
But that means they also made the demographic transition very quickly. going from pre-industrial rice paddy subsistence farming to living in high-rise condos in a single generation. So they went from having 6 and 7 children per woman back in the 1970s to 1.1 today, which means that the Chinese population is already in collapse. And with the new data that has come out actually since the book published, we now know that there's going to be less than 650 million Chinese by 2050. And that means we're facing complete economic collapse this decade, because by the time we get to 2030, there will actually be far more retirees in China than there are working age people, and no children to speak of to generate the next generation at all. And Shanghai and Beijing have the lowest.
I don't know why those yellow bars are... Oh, it's a quarter done. See, you can see there in the middle. Let's transition that. And then I have another song. Is this the same song as the beginning? Breath, Eyes, Memory Meditation. Yeah. I kind of like that idea of bringing back in the old song. Where's the rest of it? Is that it? Can't be it. Slow me down. Maybe it's it. Maybe it's a very short song. Anyway, let's bring it in about here, and I might even just copy it. I can't do anything else. Like, listen.
To generate the next generation at all. And Shanghai and Beijing have the lowest. Generate the next generation at all. And Shanghai and Beijing have the low.
I want the music to sort of punctuate his sentence at all. Boom.
Generate the next generation at all. And Shanghai and Beijing have the lowest birth rate of any metro region in any era in any country in history. And we now have the Chinese officials publicly discussing, not happy about it, but discussing that they actually overcounted their population by 100 million people, and all of those people would have been born since the one-child policy was developed, so age 40 and under. And then most of those were women. They aged past the point of being able to repopulate probably 15 years ago, and their population probably actually peaked around 2005. Most Chinese now live in efficient. Most Chinese now live in efficiency apartments. There's just no. Well, I expect we'll have a series of regional. There's just no. Well, I expect we'll have a series of regional powers that are, if not immune, heavily resistant to the trends that I've identified. The United States and New Zealand are to the trends that I've identified. The United States and New Zealand are not the only countries that have been able to maintain.
I could fix that, but I'm trying to get to the end now.
Both make that list.
I have 5 more minutes.
So if your population is stable, and you have a military that is kind of right-sized.
Just going to do the stuff that I really have to.
And you have a military that is kind of right-sized to your needs, and the resources you need are relatively close at hand, so you can get them yourself as opposed to having to depend on a global system that's breaking down. You can do pretty well. So France and Western Europe, Turkey and the Eastern Mediterranean. I would have put Japan in that category, but while I was writing the book, the Japanese and the Americans, first under Trump and then under Biden.
Get rid of that because it's a.
First under Trump. First under Biden, and the Americans, first under Biden.
I don't even like this comment because he says it all the time.
The Japanese and the American, first under Trump and then under Biden. And the Americans, first under Trump and then under Biden, basically cut a deal to get along over the long term. And that makes the Japanese makes the Japanese the only country that has successfully cut a long-term deal with both sides of
The
American
images
political
don't really
spectrum.
match
So I now kind of consider
what he's
Japan
talking about.
and the United States partners in the future,
Exactly.
which for your part of the world is brilliant, because the last thing you would have
But
wanted was the Americans and the Japanese duking it out.
the
in Southeast
internet's really
Asia.
slow,
New
because see how
Zealand
long it took
sells
to download
dairy
that.
to the Western Hemisphere.
So I'm not going to
or
bother.
rephrase that, to North America, are not going to ever be great because it's a protected market. But you've got Southeast Asia.
But I'm going to add another, when I do it in CapCut, I'm going to add animations and text and stuff, so it doesn't matter that all the actual images are not relevant, because they'll just be used as sort of a backdrop. Let's lower this music even more. It's getting a bit crazy.
Are not going to ever be great because it's a protected market. But you've got Southeast Asia right there, which broadly speaking is self-sufficient in basic foodstuffs and energy and raw materials. But if they're going to grow, they're going to need more.
Oh, that's downloaded finally. That's good news. Let's move that. Can't even see that one. Let's move that to there.
They're going to need more of all of it. And that's where you and the Australians come into play in a very, very big way. Australasia will have the option of repeating what they've done with fueling the Chinese rise with a bunch of countries that are closer, that are not nearly as politically persnickety, that don't try to take over other people's cultures or dominate their policies, and honestly are on a far more sustainable growth path than anything the Chinese were ever able to muster. There will be challenges. I think energy is probably going to be the biggest one for New Zealand, because you're going to have to get your petroleum from somewhere, and the Middle East is going to be as dicey as it's ever been, especially with the United States no longer there. A lot of these regional powers are going to have to try to get there themselves to get the energy, and the United States just doesn't care. That means for the Kiwis,
I'm going to add a bit more of this music. I really like this music rather than the, because he speaks in such a breathless way, and the news is quite dramatic. You don't need more dramatic music. The piano sort of softens it. It's sort of like, it's dramatic, but stay calm.
Your land is perfect and your climate is perfect to grow almost whatever you want to do. So the reason you've shifted in the direction that you have is because in a globalized system, you're able to get top dollar for it. I do see that dialing back somewhat, but don't. But don't overplay that, because you've got Australia right next door. So the cereals question, that's where you're least competitive. You can buy that from the Aussies and sell them the things that they're not good at. So I have very high confidence that the disruptions to your system outside of the energy sector are likely to be manageable. Economic change gets tricky because, well, just our math isn't. Economic change gets tricky because, well, just our math isn't that good yet. We know that the climate is warming. We know on average the path that we're on, and it's not great. But trying to figure out what it means for the specific postcode, that is just beyond our capacity. The best example. The best example I can give you is right here in the United States. Last summer, we had a heat dome form. We had.
So I can live with a breath, but I can't live with a breath and an R. It's too much. It's worth getting rid of.
We had a heat dome form in the American Northwest, which is usually the chilliest part of the country and has very few days that are above 30 degrees centigrade ever. But that heat dome settled over Portland, which is.
If you see that little link there, you want to unlink it, because if you leave it there, I'll show you, it deletes that clip. Undo. So you want to unlink and then delete, and then it will keep it.
That heat dome settled over Portland, which is the chilliest and rainiest and cloudiest of our metro zones. And we hit not just 40, but 45 for 2 weeks straight.
Get rid of that little That's the interviewer. I cut all his questions out already, which is why the topics sort of jump around, because he's asked questions, obviously.
5 for 2 weeks straight. I mean, that's warmer than Las Vegas has ever been. No one predicted that. People can predict that the Northern Territories will get hot, or the American South is going to be hot, but Portland? No.
No. Let's do this music one more time. All the way to the end.
Predict that the Northern Territories will get hot, or the American South is going to be hot, but Portland? No. We can make some broad brush statements, and I think it affects agriculture more than everything else put together. But we can't really tell what it's going to do to this or that city, at least not yet. The Russians are trying to plug the access points to their territory.
Russia again? Really? I'm bored.
2 of those access points are on the other side of Ukraine. Also, the Russian demography is the second worst in the world, so if they're going to use military tactics in an attempt to secure a better future for themselves, they always had to do it now. So this always had to happen. It always had to happen about right now. The surprising bit is that even before deglobalization has really kicked in full
I like
force,
these images.
is that the Europeans are taking lead on cutting Russia out of the system. And that sounds great from a moral point of view, but you're removing the world's second largest source of exported crude from the market. At the same time, you're removing the world's largest source of fertilizers from the market. There is no way with those two things in the mix that we all make it through this. The breakdown in the fertilizer system, it was going to happen anyway because of the Ukraine war. It's happening much faster.
I find the fertilizer
That is
system
by far the thing I'm most concerned about overall. It will take us 20 to 30 years to rebuild the supply systems that we're losing right now. And in the time that we don't have enough fertilizer to grow food for 8 billion people, we won't have 8 billion people any longer.
Whoa. So there's lots of topics covered. In the future, I'd like to just put them together when he's cranking out more content. It'll be a case of compiling them into videos on topics rather than just on time and location. But this is just practicing my process. So that's done. What I'm going to do, let me just check the beginning again.
We've had a weird road. It used to be that everything that was imperial, and you had a British system, a French system, a Japanese system, and those systems fought over colonies or access and trade lanes.
Yeah. And then you just press this button down the bottom right. Press movie. This is how you export it. Press photos. So this is where it's going to save it to. And then you can choose the resolution. I'm always torn about how good to do it because I'm going to import it again. And you got to, depends on how much space you have. This is a 2 terabyte iPad and there's only 120 gig left. And obviously the bigger the size, the longer it's going to take, and it's longer to import, blah, blah, blah. Let's do 4K. I want this one to be really good. Just make it standard though. So it's about 4 gig for 14 minutes. And then you press right, and then, yeah. Will take a little while. And then, so I'll make another video and show you how I add the animations in CapCut.